I met this person on an airplane and never saw them again. So I'm just saying, this story was told to me. The guy sits down next to me, asks me what I do. I said, video games. He says, you ever hear of Shining Mountain Entertainment? I said, yeah, I work there. And he proceeds to tell me this like elaborate story. One person from the team apparently took 3 or 4 million bucks and ran off to Brazil, and no one had seen him again. The strategy that they had used for collecting the money was that he leveraged his connections to the Mormon church. This again is what I'm being told by this dude who was hunting down each person. He said actually they had a team of people hunting down, trying to get the money back for these four people that had invested. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I invested 50K right now into anything, that would hurt if that was just gone.
Welcome back to Dial the Gate to the Stargate Oral History Project. I'm David Reed. Here's Katie Postma. How are you?
Well, I'm great, but I'm going to be really busy tonight, apparently, and I won't be able to join you and
So,
Sean and Steve. I'm so sorry.
long of the short, we're recording this at the end of the show. There was a scheduling mix-up that was because I did not send out a reminder. So that's the big portion of that. So Sean Dugan and Steve Garvin, who were the helping build the story for the game. So much of the
Hmm.
heart and soul of what the story was going to be. They're going to be in this episode, and Katie will be joining us at the tail end. But I wanted
I'm
you to
sorry.
to share any thoughts that you had of them before we got into the thick of it.
Oh, I'm just so glad that I got to see them even only for a few minutes. If I guess like we talked about, the best way to describe who they were at the office, not just in making the game itself, but they were the gym in the office,
They
if
were
if
Jim
you're
from The Office.
they're
Two of
so
them.
great, but they're just their sense of humor and just but so smart, just so smart and so fun. And I remember there were moments where they were so intent on making the game a certain way or a certain deadline or something really important and so passionate about it. But I mean, yeah, the rest of the time they were I mean, even then, they were just so fun to be around and always inspirational to me. So it was great to see them again. Thanks for having them, and sorry, sorry I wasn't here more for it.
No, well, we'll meet back up with you at the end.
Okay.
Guys, this is a treat to have you in a space again. I don't know if I'll be able to take the next 90 minutes alone with both of you coming at me from both sides, but we're going to see. Uh, it's it's actually kind of wild. So thanks so much for stepping in. Steve, how you doing?
I am good. I am good. I have a prank story to tell your audience about you that I enjoyed to this very day that we did to
Oh,
you.
there are many stories. We're really happy to be here, David, mainly because we want to tell lots of embarrassing stories about everything that
That's our
happened.
goal.
Because
Oh
Stargate
my
Worlds
God.
was truly a delightful. It was a great project with a lot of great people, and so we had a lot of fun behind the scenes as well as trying to put stuff in front of people.
I just
Absolutely.
it's a row of apologies for me being a 24-year-old, 23-year-old kid in my first like adult job and with a team of like almost 100 people. It's like, oh my God, I could have done so much better at XYZ because half of it, at least half of it, is personalities. And it is important as to what you can put out, and what you can create. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a thick skin, if people can't get along with you, you're not going to last, you know?
Well,
So it was quite you guys really went through the fire after I left. That was wild to behold from, a little bit of a distance. Just how are they doing? That bad, huh? Oh man. But what I've discovered in this program and long before is a unity of being in the trenches and a common spirit of family. I was going to be fancier with that, but it's just the case.
Steve and I, we met on Stargate Worlds, and we've known each other now for like many years. So we've talked, and we're actually pretty good friends, or at least friends adjacent at the very least.
We're friends.
But we've commented on a couple of occasions that the team that built Stargate Worlds, or was building Stargate Worlds, was a very talent dense team. I mean, you hear that term a lot, but like genuinely it is the case. And you can kind of see it over the arc of the last 20 years, like where people have gone in their careers. And, we got a lot of people that, they were like, a lot of folks are very young. We were all kind of young and naive in our own different ways when we joined the project. But there was talent there, definitely. And it's just grown over time.
The concept artists who are external to us have been working diligently away doing their sketches. They're actually looking pretty good. For a first generation pass, just starting to work, they're remarkably good. And we expect to get better at it as we go.
What Tim was saying a second ago about the fence. The issue with the fence isn't that someone is choosing to put the fence there to help tell the story. They should consider that when they put the fence there. The question is, are they doing it to put the fence there so that it's a cool thing that draws my attention to the fact that this fence has been placed in an incredibly cool spot that tells me a secret story about the fence? Or is the fence serving the story of the farm, which is serving the story of the game?
Right, the fence tells a story. It tells a story that it's holding animals in because this is a farm.
Absolutely.
And as long as it does that, you're spot on. I think, but it's like to your point, if the fence is a demonstration of a technology feature, that's probably ill-advised to put the fence there.
I mean, the good lines I would guess in this quote are the writer trying to be
Clever.
Clever.
Right.
Part of the reason I think that Stargate Worlds didn't ever ship was because of the decision to put it in Arizona. Because Arizona had some good things about it, but it wasn't where people in the industry lived. So you had to pull people out there. So the team had a lot of green people, new people willing to do anything for their first job. And we had really good veteran people. We didn't have a lot of like middle, this person's been in the business 5 years kind of folks. And that like weird gap in experience at times cost us because we'd make mistakes that happened sort of up and down here and there. And it just cost us time. Our team was like really talented, and as I've gone on in my career, it's still one of the best teams I was ever on. It might remain, for the scope and size, the best team at that size I've ever been on. But we had a lot of really good people who were really green, who were learning. And so when you have that, you have experience, you have gaps, you have mistakes, and again, those mistakes cost us time, which shouldn't have mattered. But because of the fancy finances of our, I don't know, it's a public podcast, but I'm just going to say it. The finance stuff that happened when the market crashed basically buried us, and we didn't have the runway we needed to try to finish the game.
Yeah, I think there was a game there that could have been made with a little more time, and I think to the team. I mean, this is speaking more from the design team because that's like what Steve and I are most familiar with. I got to give so much props to like Chris Klug, right? I mean, this is a guy that found people across like a lot of different sources, and they came there because they wanted to work not only on this project but work with him. That I worked with Chris previously on an MMO called Earth and Beyond. And so, when the opportunity came up, it's like, of course I wanted to work with Chris again. And, and then the folks that he assembled, it's like, he had a knack for finding, kind of diamonds in the rough and bringing them to Arizona.
That's because it's that's Chris's thing. Like, Chris is super people person-y. Like, he loved at least he loved on Stargate, the human part of our team and getting to know people and the quirks and all that kind of stuff and mentoring people. Like, Chris was very much into that. I mean, I would not be on the team at all. David, I think I shared this story with you, but I can share it again. I applied to one of the jobs through a recruiter, and she and I did a test, and the test was like, I think I took a lot of hours on that test, like, I don't know, 30 hours, something like that. So,
Wow.
unlike the rest of you, I was old when I was trying to get into Stargate because it was sort of a second career for me. And when they rejected me, I was like, okay, I'm cool with that. Can you get some feedback on what I was missing in the thing? Because I wasn't just going to be like, I put this effort in and not hear anything. They could say no, but I figured I
You're
would
going to
ask.
ask.
And the recruiter was like, yeah, I mean, I could, you could tell that she did not love the idea because she was kind of like, I mean, I guess I can go back there. Chris is really looking, you really need somebody who's got a writing credit. And I had won a screenwriting award that was like a pretty prestigious screenwriting award. And I mentioned that and I was like, tell them about the nickel. I have pedigree for that.
And to be fair, you are the last new face in Star Trek: The Next Generation. That's all I'm saying.
That's true. That was
It's a big
my
deal.
acting. Yes, that hurts.
It's 4 decks down, sir. Section 005.
Because I look much better and a lot younger there. And she took the thing back to Chris, and he was like, he won the nickel, so Chris knew what the nickel was. And then we had an interview, and we got along famously, and that was how I got there. But I was rejected initially, but it was through our conversations that we connected, and Chris is like that. There's a way that he sort of he's a theater guy, which I think he mentioned on the podcast he was on. One of the things about there's approaches to theater as a director. There's different ways that people direct. There's like a spectrum here of these kinds of things. There's a director who reads a script, imagines exactly what will be, and then casts and attempts to recreate exactly their image of what that thing might be. It's very rigorous and you're trying to fit into this mold. There are other kinds of directors who sort of cast the actors and see what happens. And the see what happens thing can be amazing or it can be horrendous, but it's looser. It takes a lot more courage. And Chris, I would argue, falls more on that side of things. He had plans, he had things he wanted to do, but he also gave people room to sort of bring their stuff to the table. And I think that was kind of always his superpower in my mind, was that he was good at sort of hey, you're good at that. Let's keep pushing that. Let's make that your thing. And he would give people a little bit of room. I think at times it also bit him in the ass, candidly. But I think that, it's a more courageous way to work. It's much easier to just sort of have a vision and make everybody else fit in it. It's maybe not as fun for them, but it's, you can be safer. And Chris took those risks. And I think part of that is because he likes people and he likes what they, that different people bring different things.
He's an educator.
It's fair to say that, the story and the kind of writing and, what was being aimed for with Stargate Worlds is some of the most ambitious you'll ever see in games. Seriously, to this day, 20 years later, I can't think of a lot of games that were going to go live with the kind of story and, and writing quality and this sort of thing that we were aiming for in Stargate Worlds. And it's the kind of thing where, I came into the game industry from more of a journalistic background. Steve was more screenwriting and that kind of stuff. So, I had kind of this mechanical sort of training in terms of my writing. Whereas you work with a guy like Chris, and Chris is he's a very people-oriented person. He's very, kind of emotional and thinking of craft in a different way. And so he forces you to sort of up your game. And so, we were bringing a lot of creativity to the table from all the different individuals who are part of the team, trying to make this thing that would be worthy of Stargate, and because I would argue Stargate is, I personally, I came to Stargate as more of a casual fan. I had watched some of it, I'd seen the movie and everything, but I wasn't a devotee in the way. But I always was struck and thought the core concept was super interesting. The core concept in terms of a story and layers in the story of human beings sort of discovering that the gods of old are false. They're not gods. They're these, beings from other worlds, and that we are stepping through this doorway into a universe which is dangerous, and kind of growing up from being, the children of Earth to fledgling adults, teenagers, if you will, going into the universe and trying to find our way. And it's it's a really compelling and interesting concept. Plus, it's fun to have soldiers running around, and then like, Egyptian, crazy things, and that mix of like fantasy and modern. It's really interesting and layered.
Steve, how
One of
familiar
the
were
things
you
that
with
was pretty
Stargate?
interesting. Oh, sorry, dude.
Yeah, before you insert, how familiar were you with the franchise?
You asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Not really at all.
Okay.
Saw the movie. I knew stuff, but I had experience, and over my career, I've had experience like diving into franchises and trying, like learning what their stuff is very quickly, and you just sort of like pick it up, and you have to get the mojo of it. At a different point on a different job, I was working in a Harry Potter game and was pitching to Joe Rowling, "Hey, this is what Harry Potter's about," to her face, which was very fascinating. But she agreed and liked it, so we were good. But that's like part of the job. You just have to dive in. So I became a fan. I really enjoyed it once I dove in, but I didn't know that much about it before. You kind of know that because I would use you as a sort of like gauge of Stargate-ness, because you have to 100% when you are on something like this, deliver as much of it as you can, as authentically as you can. It cannot be Stargate adjacent with the name on it. It would disappoint the fans, and also you need it to string everything together, and for everything to hold together, it has to sort of like stay in this world with this fabric that the show had created. So we were always trying to do that. One of the things I was going to say is that just to give you a sense of what Sean was talking about in terms of ambition, we were doing stuff that was risky. So when you returned to a planet, in a lot of games at the time, like in WoW, if I went out of a town and I came back, it was assumed that it was the same sort of people, same character, and you would sort of consume the content there and then it would exit.
Same iteration of it.
When we were using a ton of instance notions where I would come back to a planet that had an evolution since you've been there. We weren't doing it as physically as some instance things, but essentially we were kind of taking a risk there. This idea that like, would the story move forward? Would that feel weird? That like you were there talking about someone and something 2 acts behind me. How would that feel? And then, I don't know, 20 minutes after it all fell apart, WoW basically did the same thing. And we were like, oh, okay, yeah, it would have worked. I mean, they did it a little different than we were, but we had a lot of like really stuff going on the project, a lot of risks, and that I give Chris a lot of credit for. He was open to those ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, again, going into the heading of like it being an unusual project, it would be very rare for you to see this kind of combination in one project where it's like, this was, like you said, a young team, kind of a small team, not like the biggest team, not like the massive army that you see on like other projects in later days, coming together a little bit green with huge ambitions. Not just, we focus a little bit on like story and content, but like overall the game was like very ambitious in what it was going for. Inherently an MMO is like an ambitious endeavor. They're not easy to build or maintain by any means. And then to do something that is, like Steve's saying, this kind of risky, like the world is evolving because of things that you've done in the storyline and some of the game mechanics that were happening, and kind of the cover-based system, and like getting something that feels a little bit more like modern warfare in this like unusual setting. A lot of ambition, and that's again what probably what undermined the project eventually, is just that like with that kind of ambition and a team that occasionally is making mistakes and has to like figure out how to get through the woods, you need a little time, and time ran out.
A little stuff like I think that you've talked about this in other ones, but the cover-based combat system. So just technically, that is like a major departure from something like WoW. And understanding where I'm standing, throwing rays through that, is this blocked or not? Does this mitigate or not? And then the packet transmission that has to happen back in those days, and all that kind of stuff. Like there's so much technical stuff to just make that work. That doesn't even include all the other stuff of the NPCs, like having an AI that they are running through and finding places to stand so they can shoot at you. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And I think Sean said it at the beginning of this, but we never saw it materialize fully. I would argue the game never reached where we wanted it to go. What you could do when you could play the parts you could play is that if you squinted a little bit, you saw it. You saw that you saw what it wanted to be, and you could see it. But we never, I don't know how much in this retro, people talked about it, but we were never like there, and it was, 10 minutes and some content away. Like, we still had things that we had to develop, but the things that we were developing were really interesting, and they had really fantastic potential. It could have been very groundbreaking. It also could have fallen on its face because, let's be honest, nobody knows what a game is going to do. They can say they know, they don't know. You hope it would have.
Especially a game that goes live, that getting the game to the shipping point. I mean, Steve and I have worked on a lot of games subsequently. That's step one. I mean, just shipping and launching is like step one. It's the steps afterwards that are really critical. And especially when you're talking about, something like an MMO, it's like, you want people to subscribe and continue to subscribe and love what you're doing and everything. So keeping it running in live is half the battle. And just to comment on something Steve said, that, I think it's important to know, like, when you say potential, like, it's funny because in game development, usually there's a long period where to see that there's going to be a game that even has an inkling of fun, you got to really squint. I mean, it's like you're squinting hard, you're wearing like really thick glasses. It's like, it's painful. And professional game developers often are be like, this thing, it's terrible. It's like, it's going to suck. We got to, blow it up and start all over again. And you're like, hold on. Let us stay the course for a little bit longer. And then there's usually this like tipping point where it goes from like, this thing is the biggest flaming wreckage pile you've ever seen to like, wait a minute, maybe it's not on fire. It's not there yet, but like there's a turning point where people start to realize like there's something there. And so maybe if we can keep on this path for a little while longer, it could actually click. And I think that Stargate Worlds had just kind of found that like that inflection point that really makes suddenly it's like, it's like Dorothy is, now in the land of Oz and everything's in color. And you're like, this is interesting.
It's alive. And then the money ran out. God. No, I'll save that. A little bit of backstory to jog everyone's memory. We found out about, I can't remember when it was. It was sometime in I think in 2007, we found out that they were killing the Asgard. And that was a big deal because you were supposed to be able to play an Asgard. So that really narrowed down the perspective of time that the game would be set. We ended up setting it at the end of season 8 before season 9, after Mobius, where a puddle jumper was discovered. And that was going to be the inciting incident that really sped us into the story. What do you guys remember about crafting the broader strokes for the game?
I mean, I can speak to that quite a bit, and Steve can, kind of help add. I mean, for better or worse, I will say that like a lot of the big story elements that you're familiar with came from me to start with, and then kind of workshopping a lot of that stuff with Steve to get it to a good point. I mean, I can vividly remember at one point after Chris Klug had, brought me out to Arizona and, I was getting settled. I was brought out kind of specifically to solve like a pre-existing story that wasn't quite working. The original version of kind of like where the game was going, I kind of characterize it sometimes as it was like Back to the Future 2, where you're this character who's kind of behind the scenes, who's always like kind of shifting stuff for the main characters to do their thing. And it kind of went through this like very, kind of methodical from the start of the series, and like all these like points, from like A to Z. And, it wasn't quite what you would expect in sort of the fantasy of being like an up in front, member of Stargate or whatever faction, being the hero of your own journey. And so, crafting a story where you could have some room to be like a hero that is kind of, or a villain that is, on par with like an O'Neill, you know what I mean? It's like, that is a trick to pull off. And so that's at least from my perspective, one of the biggest reasons that we chose that gap between seasons 8 and 9, because like there's this point where it's like, okay, they're shutting down the SGC, they're wrapping it up. There's like this kind of undefined period between, that and then the kind of like bringing in Mitchell, was it? That, you know,
That's
like
right.
as kind of the new SGC, right? And so that was this gap that we felt like, okay, we're going to insert ourselves and create like a massive story that is within that. But because of the like esoteric kind of, ancient technologies and all this kind of stuff, we can do a little bit of hand waving and make some like crazy things happen. But then it's all kind of like, but it was a big secret. And, you're one of the special few that kind of knows about what happened, but like most people will never, ever know because they just kind of went about their lives.
Yeah. You're ultimately guarding a doorway with a very, very bad guy behind it and keeping him locked away for all eternity is the idea that you're left with. I don't know if you guys watched it, but Tori Higginson narrated the bones of the outline, and she did a great job. So setting it to some images of the show. Steve?
I hate to say this, but it is just true for me. I've written a lot of stories over the years. Before I got into games, even I was doing screenplays. I think I had about 14 spec screenplays rolling around, and then I got into games. And I am terrible at years later remembering the details of the stuff I wrote. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I will read it later, and I have at times been like, "Oh my God, that was a pretty good twist. I fooled myself." So I don't.
That's the best part. When you realize that you're like way smarter than you ever thought you were because you read something and you're like, "Who's the genius who wrote this?"
Right.
Oh, wow, it was me. That's crazy.
Also, you read it and you go, "Oh my God,
Mm.
God, why did I do that?" But
Yeah.
with the thing that I remember most about the core story is I told Sean I was going to tell the story, so I'm going to tell it now anyway. So a thing that I was very impressed with, Sean joined the team after me. I was there first, but Sean was sort of brought in to be the lead. So I got there when we were still assembling the Avengers, if that makes sense. And Sean had, at the time, I didn't really, this is how much I didn't understand the way that creative stuff works on a video game. Sean called a meeting, and we were all going into this meeting. He was going to just show us and deliver the story of Stargate Worlds. And he doesn't remember this meeting at all. But for me, it was very interesting. So we go in, and he like presents the story of Ra and the 5 acts and everything. And I had come from a world where virtually every time I presented anything, it was shot down because I was trying to sell scripts, right? So I got a lot of negative feedback, a lot of times. And I'll never forget how impressed I was, but also how much I learned about the sort of Sean presented the whole thing so extremely confidently, like, "Hey, here's our story. Strap in because this is what we're making." And it did galvanize people behind it. And we did have a jump, and I never forgot it. It's one of the things from the show or from working on that game that I've sort of always sort of kept in my pocket and try to remember when I'm in that spot doing that now. Because you have to like set that forward. And we had a really good sort of like baseline, and then the writing team sort of added meat to those bones, if that makes sense. But we never really deviated too much from that original structure once we had it.
Well, and it's funny because, like Steve says, I don't even remember the meeting because I was probably super nervous at the time, like doing it and like, presenting the confident facade of like, here's our story. And I think it's, the idea, I mean, when you're making a game, right, it's shocking how much work people do like independently, and kind of they have a lot of room to like build stuff and do their own thing. And so one of the great challenges is trying to figure out how it all moves in like one coherent direction. And so, I mean, I maybe came across stronger at the time than I intended, but like the idea was to set like some guardrails that like, okay, this is the fundamental thing that we're going to try to do. And so, you bring your creativity into this, it's like, it's, we've talked, Steve and I have talked about this, that it's like, if you're a showrunner on a television series, it's like, what show you're trying to make, and you get writers in the room who are bringing like their creativity, and, they can do some stuff that's kind of wild and crazy, but they have to do it within the framework of that show. I mean, Stargate can have an episode where it's like a Groundhog Day episode, which is not like your typical like thing that they would do, but it can work because they're doing it within the framework of the established stuff of Stargate. You know, in the same way that like, you know, Star Trek can do like an episode that's like a legal drama, which that's not normally what they do, but they framed it within this thing. And so, you know, trying to build like this story that we could, you know, all kind of bring our own individual takes, but it would be like coherent, moving in the same direction was the intention. And, you know, I mean, I remember vividly pitching it to Chris, because like, you know, Chris Klug, he gave the blessing, right? And so that's why I could go in with confidence and go to the team and be like, okay, this is the story we're doing, because Chris, you know, had signed off on it. You know, we were in like a Denny's or something, and I go through this rant, and I'm probably like, you know, the crazy guy that's like, you know, if there could have been a whiteboard behind me with like little, you know, strings connecting pictures, serial killer board, that probably would have been a good image. But I give him this whole big thing, and it's leaning pretty heavily into some sci-fi concepts. Like, I mean, because of the stuff that was influencing me, you know, we got a lot of, you know, kind of, you know, fairly high sci-fi stuff in this, more than you would typically see in a Stargate kind of like episode, because our budget was bigger. You know, we could go big. And Chris, you know, I remember him kind of like, he looked at me and he did this Chris thing where Chris like leans back and he crosses his arms and he like kind of goes like this as he's like thinking deep on something. And he's like, if you think you can pull that off, okay. You know, and it's like he knew it was like ambitious, and he knew it was a little esoteric. Because, you know, I mean, the Stragus and, you know, time bending and Ra coming back and all that stuff. I mean, it was all deliberate. It was all like very conscious choices for like building a story. But it was ambitious. But, you know, he's like, if you guys can do it, go for it. And so then, you know, it's a matter of getting everybody and getting talent like Steve. You know, like Steve was like a huge find, coming from outside the game industry and everything, to build this thing. But, you know, when we were building kind of this storyline, it was all like very deliberate. You know, I mean, we knew we needed a hook for like players, and we needed this to appeal to both, you know, dedicated television viewers, as well as people who like, you know, they'd maybe seen the movie and were like, oh yeah, that movie with the Egyptian stuff, cool, right? So that's why Ra being a figure that it's like, okay, let's bring him back. We will, you know, this resurgent threat, Ra is being resurrected. How is that possible? That shouldn't be possible. That's a big question mark. Oh, that's kind of the mystery you're solving. So it's like the threat of Ra kind of steamrolling the universe, with the open question of like, how is that possible? And who are these entities that seem to be working with him, the Stragus, and what is that about?
Right, and then 6 storylines all tied against how they're all dealing with Ra in a different way. And the Ra thing was really smart and structurally made a ton of sense. I know this is, you know, Stargate centric podcast, but if you think about that product, and I think this way much more now as a veteran who's been around in games and been in creative lead spots, you have to make a game as broad as you can. And had we gone down a path where we took more specific stuff, it's funny that you were talking about the previous story, Sean, that you sort of redid, because there was an MMO that came out during this time. This was the time when WoW had sort of ascended, and there were a lot of games taking shots at WoW. And one of them was Lord of the Rings Online. And Lord of the Rings Online's entire move was, hey, look, over there's Frodo, but you're doing this over here. And you'd see them for a brief moment. You were never them. You were never Evan. And I think our choice of giving you the opportunity to kind of be the hero, you'd still interact with the characters from the show and stuff, but you weren't their sidekick. You were doing stuff that was really important. Like, that approach was really smart. And again, against like 6 different storylines, it's ironic, because I still think that object was really, really great for setting guardrails. And I think one of the places where we suffered from inexperience on the team was that we sometimes struggled to keep our writing team inside those guardrails and lost time because they would go outside it. We'd have to redo stuff. And over the years, I've learned like the value of having those North Stars for people to understand what you're doing is really, 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 it's invaluable. Like, there is almost nothing as a creative lead more important than everybody understanding the game you're making. Because I use this in a talk that I do, but like, if we're making Barbie Dreamhouse, there's a version of Barbie Dreamhouse that's Barbie Dreamhouse Zombocalypse, where it's Barbie but zombies and like but if that's not the game you're making, you have to make the Barbie game. You know what I mean? And it has to be the best Barbie game that you can make. And I think that Stargate Worlds at times, and part of our struggle was that thing would occasionally wobble. You know what I mean? It would pull it back. Part of that was Chris giving people freedom to see where they went, right? He wasn't sitting in their shorts making sure that it was in a single direction and then keeping it sort of like driving. And it was great. It was a great first experience, and super talented team. We got a lot of great stuff on that. It's disappointing that it never got its shot because I think it had a chance.
I think, part of what you're talking about is, what we were talking about earlier, where it's like, being true to Stargate, like finding people that sort of can internalize what it's about on sort of like an emotional or an instinctive level even, is really, it's important and very challenging because, especially a show like Stargate. I mean, when we started development on it, God, we were like in season 9 or something of the show.
Season
like
10 was filming, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, there was a lot of material here, and look, if you were to grab Brad Wright and everything and pin him to a corner, I'm sure he would tell you like, yeah, there were some episodes that were like, yeah, well, if I could go back in the time machine and erase those, I probably would, right? There, it usually takes a couple of seasons early on to really get your feet as a series and really establish your tone. And so, when you're doing material that is based on, this canon, you can always point to stuff to justify almost anything. You can be like, hey, we're gonna do something because, in episode 47 at, time index, whatever, O'Neill said this. So like, sure, we can do it. But it's like, is that really the core experience of Stargate, right? Does that really represent like what resonated with the fans? And so we were always trying to stay true to things. And, I think Steve and I are both people that, like, as writers, we try to internalize the essence of the IP that we're working on, kind of make it like a part of our, like heart and soul, so that you can kind of go from an instinct point of view. But that's also why it is that we would hit up you at times, because not only were you like a walking encyclopedia, like, before the days where I could just, ask AI like, hey, what happened in this? It's like, let's ask David. He's our AI. About something that happened, but then also get like kind of a tonal read on things that, like, besides the kind of the factual stuff, it's like, why does this resonate with you? What is it about this that like works? Or does it feel appropriate? And, some of our little internal controversies and everything would center on things that just felt tonally off. I mean, I think you guys have talked previously about the infamous trailer that went out and some of the
oh boy
that came with that.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. We come in peace. Wait, no, we don't.
Well, I mean, David, the original version of that actually had the Stargate soldier come out and then busted out his lightsaber and he like charged in and started like smacking people around with it, and he killed
That's the game I would have played.
It was pretty epic at the time. But we had to like, tone that one down.
Gosh. Sean, you are the only person who's taken a swing at the Furlings. No one else has done that.
Yeah. I mean, again, there were a few choices that I made that, I'm going to chalk it up to youthful enthusiasm, because these were big things. I mean, again, every choice we made was like pretty deliberate. Like I said, like bringing back Raw, that was a deliberate choice because it's like, oh, it hooks new fans, it resonates with old fans, and it's like, it's a good hook, right? Then there's this idea of, there's the Furling, where it's like, in the people who, watch the show, it's like there's this unsolved mystery of like, who were the Furling, right? And it's, it's easy to make a joke about it. And, yes, the original pitch on the Furlings was going to be that there would be like, heartwarmy Furling and then like grumpy Furling, and it'd be the Care Bears. No, that was never actually the pitch. But the Furling seemed like, hey, there's a mystery here. There's an unanswered question. That's a gap that we can fill. Like, we could, if we come up with something that's good enough, that could become like the answer to this question that is a part of, the canon. And so that was one of the reasons that, we kind of cracked open that box. To me, the name Furling, you could easily see it as kind of silly, but it always had this kind of resonance to me, like this kind of like weird, Irish Celtic kind of mythology, like the Furling, and it's like, this would be like some kind of like the Tuatha De Danann, which in Irish mythology are like these like kind of elvish people, like something in that space. So it's like, okay, what kind of entities could they be if they were like these exotic otherworldly things? And when we talk about Stargate is like looking at aliens through this lens of like them being perceived as gods, it felt like one of the areas that we could explore would be some of the like Judeo-Christian duology of like dark and light, fallen angels, things that are intended to be good, but something went horribly wrong and they became bad. And so that's where kind of the notion of the duality of like the Furling becoming this like kind of corrupted thing, which was the Stragus. And so both the light and the dark are kind of the same entity, just, spread out.
But you can see in the discussion, David, like one thing is you could attack the Furling in a lot of ways. And fundamentally, and like I'm not just saying in terms of like what they are, but also like how you attack them. But I think one thing that we did that I wish it had come out, because I thought it was always smart, is that we didn't attack the Furling with, oh, we've explained the Furling for you in chapter 3 in a 3-paragraph thing, and then they exit. We made the Furling seminal through the entire storyline, and you interact with them to solve things, and they become part of the explanation of what's happening and why Ra's back. And all of that stuff was sort of part of our approach. I don't know, Sean, if you remember this, and I am terrible at names because one of the writers, when we went to visit them up in Vancouver, we asked about the Furling, and he was right. Yeah, and he was like, I you know what? I wanted the humans to be the 5th race because it sounded cool.
Then the 4th.
And so I needed a name for the 4th race, and I was like, Furling. And that was like the depth of the thought around the Furling that they had put it. Like they would do hints about it, but they never defined it or anything. And probably it's in the top 3 or 4 moments in my career of pure satisfaction was when they didn't only like what we did, but they wanted to use the stuff we made in their show. That they were like, yeah, this stuff is pretty cool. We want to use OpCore. We want to have this kind of stuff happen. Because OpCore was like, we needed it for a video game. You couldn't have, light humans and not dark humans. And we needed that. And OpCore was a notion. But there's a lot of ways you could do dark humans. You had dark humans from the planet, Zort over here that didn't exist anywhere. But we thought there were things like we needed them to all use the same assets and things like that video games require. That's part of the reason that they had to be, SGC adjacent. But that stuff was really great, and they really embraced that. But that's kind of what's cool about the whole process, right? Is that the guy could make that word up for fun because he was like, I don't know, I can't think of anything better, and that turns into this fundamental thing that we try to use through. And it really like part of the web that tied the whole game together.
Well, what I remember when we were, pitching Brad and like the folks up in Vancouver is that, when we said like, well, we're going to answer the Furling question, he was like, really? You're going to try to answer that? He was like, you're going to go there? And he was like, I mean, he's a really friendly guy and like really cool and nice and everything. But you could tell there was like some skepticism there of like, okay, I'm not so sure about these video game guys. But then we went through the pitch and everything and explained them like where we were going to go with it and everything. And he was like, okay, that's cool. Like, and, one of the things that was really interesting is that I think they were very supportive of not only like some of the specific choices we made in terms of like story and like some stuff that like got them excited about like things becoming canon, like OpCore, the dark SGC faction becoming like a real thing. I mean, what I remember is that Brad was saying, like, we're going to use that faction and that character in the next DVD movie.
Revolutions.
I think it was,
Yeah, they were planning on Stargate Revolutions and throwing like one of your antagonists in. So there was consideration.
Yeah. I mean, they got excited about the ideas, but on kind of like another level, it was like they were supportive of the idea of us kind of like drawing on a slightly bigger canvas, because they would always acknowledge that, like, look, we don't have the budget to do unlimited things on a TV show. I mean, we have human being actors, which like we have to have human beings cast as Jaffa, so we can't make them like super
3 times this big,
gigantic, oversized, Hulk-like creatures or something like that, right? We can do more spaceships. We can go to more exotic planets that are like, they would never have the budget to do the sets for. And so a lot of the things that we kind of proposed that were a little bit out there, they could get behind, because it's like, okay, you guys have a kind of a different set of constraints that you can work with. You can expand the Stargate universe a little bit in terms of like how exotic it can be.
There's a great segue there to get where we got you in one of our pranks, David. Which is where we so the assets thing is always a thing in games, right? And the prank that we pulled was that because you did a thing at the beginning of this podcast where you're like, I had things to learn. I found you incredibly valuable. I loved working with you. It was great. I don't have any memories of any conflicts. I'm sure that there must have been something, because it's a creative situation and people have conflict, but I don't remember any of that. I do remember this, though. You gave lots of shits. And so we came up to you one time and told you that we had to change some of the worlds, and that 3 of the worlds would have to have Nazis on them as the primary enemy, because Dan had connections with Medal of Honor at the time, and we could get the assets for free. And so we had to change the storyline, and we had to integrate these Nazis into the game. And I remember telling you that story, and you were just like, what? Is it really Stargate? And we're like, yeah, we just got to make it work. You're just going to have to suck it up. And then we sent one of our writers over, Hugh, and you were talking, and Hugh was sent over to talk to you to sort of agree with what a terrible idea it was, to just like spin you more. And so he's like, I don't know. I don't even know if we can make the game anymore because of this stuff. And you were just like, when you were very, very affected, and it was lovely. And then you came into the main room where the writing and where all the design team was, in that very cubicle-y office. And across the room, I let you know that we were just great. We were pranking you and everything. But I'll never forget how spun up you were around there. You're just like, they can't. There's no way that doesn't even fit. Like they don't do that, because I had gone deep. Like, no, they've got to have like MP-34s and car rifles, and it's very World War II. We might have to have cannons and tanks. And
the Asgard wearing little helmets, and
right. Asgard. And it was.
Oh my God.
Well, David, you invited this because like the infamous trailer with the like "we don't come in peace" thing. I remember vividly you being in the office and going around and being like really like upset. And I understand why. Like I mean, to me, I don't have quite the same level of like emotional. It was more like that was kind of clunky and kind of like missed the mark in terms of like landing like an O'Neillism, right? And it just kind of seemed a little weird. But like, I mean, you were genuinely upset. Like, I remember you like, walking, being like, really like, guys, what is going on, right?
Because they do come in peace.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you're thinking about it on like multiple levels. As a fan of the show, you understand like what they are really doing, that the SGC is actually the good guys. They're not like imperialists trying to colonize something or whatever. And that, O'Neill makes quips, but like, he's the only one that really, I mean, most people are pretty serious in Stargate, except for O'Neill. And O'Neill, like, he gets a pass because like he has a past of his own. And so, but like, you just, you put a kind of a target on your back there, man.
You made yourself vulnerable to people who you should never make yourself vulnerable to. And that's the two of us, is what we're saying.
It was people who were working too many hours. We were working too many hours, and we're probably a little tired and a little punchy sometimes, and like, okay, we need to blow off some steam. Let's see.
I remember another thing, Sean. I don't remember the total details of this, but at one point there was a woman who worked with us. I don't remember her name, which is bad, but my memory is. I've just told you earlier.
Long dark hair.
Yes, and her job was to or she was brought in. I think was she a product manager or something? Anyway, one of the things that we were told was that there was concern over violence and gore, and that the gore, especially, we had to be careful with, and language, and there were some concerns over that. And so Sean and I we would do these sort of like little miniature breakdowns of what the storylines were going to be for little locales. And I made a completely false and fake one where we would go and you were going to this planet, and each area that you went to, you would do something more and more torturous and horrible. And we were like, this is a dark side story. You're a ghoul here. And it was literally at one point, like you had to find the character, the enemy, and make contact with them, and then throw them into a wood chipper, and that there would be a rooster tail of flesh that would come out the backside. And then she was like, that seems gory. And we're like, no. We'll make the flesh black. It'll be fine in Germany. And we did the whole thing. And she just like sat there and took it straight faced. It never struck her that we were just having it on. I forget, didn't we hang people upside down at one point and set fire to them? Like,
I can't remember.
The things were terrible.
Yeah, I don't remember all the details other than it was like a Saw movie meets Mortal Kombat. Like it was really over the top. I mean, like Steve is not exaggerating. There is literally a bit where it's like you're shoving somebody into a grinding machine, like out of Fargo, right?
And then the best part of the whole thing was that we would, during the course of the conversation, to make it authentic, and also because it was funny, we would start to talk about the logistics of that. So, for example, a thing that is true in games is that like having characters touch each other or connect or touch, that's a thing, especially back then. It's not easy to do. There's a bunch of things technically required to it. So there's all these things around like, well, how do we manage that? We've got to pick the body up. And we're like, no, because they're going to drop a ring over here that allows you to levitate the body. So it's more of a shooting motion that and we had like all these explanations of how we would make these horrible tortures occur. And she never flinched. I mean, I thought we were going to be done the first time. And the wood chipper was the third one, but we had other, like you hung people, you set people on fire. And the descriptions were literally like, yes, they'll be screaming. We're going to have Nick do the sound of these people burning alive, and the whole thing. And it was great. I mean, the team, we had a lot of fun with that stuff, partly because we were working tremendous number of hours. Like the day before we got the notice, Sean wasn't there anymore, but we got the notice that they weren't going to pay us in December of some year. You probably know the number. I don't know what year it was. I just remember we're not going to pay us. I had worked with Tim Sweeney, who is awesome. I'd worked with Tim Sweeney through Thanksgiving weekend, every day, 16 hours a day through the entire Thanksgiving weekend, only to come in Monday and find out we'd get a half check for December. And like we were putting in hours to try to get this thing because we were behind schedule. And in those days, burning the team was more of a thing you could do than you could kind of get away with now. It's less true now, thank goodness. But there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on when it fell apart. I have some stories about that, by the way, David, some insider stuff, which I can share at some point if you
whatever you're willing to share.
Now, I will have to preface this part with, I met this person on an airplane and never saw them again. So I'm just saying, this story was told to me. So after Stargate ended, and I'm still owed, I don't know, $6,000 back pay that I don't think I'm ever going to see it. I've given up. David, if you know of a way, I'll take it, but I couldn't get it. So
I've got some Bitcoin.
The Stargate Bitcoin. But it ended up like, I had to get a different job. I was living in Denver. My family had stayed back in Phoenix, and I was going back and forth. And I'm on an airplane coming back, and a guy sits down next to me, asks me what I do. I said, video games. He says, you ever hear of Shining Mountain Entertainment? I said, yeah, I work there. And he proceeds to tell me this like elaborate story that was all about litigation around the funding, because at this point, right, it's all washed away, and there's all kinds of, accusations against Gary and all this other stuff. But the juicy parts of the story is apparently one of the guys involved in finance, I'm not going to name names because it's a podcast and I don't feel like getting sued if I say the wrong name. One person from the team apparently took $3 or $4 million and ran off to Brazil, and no one had seen him again. the strategy that they had used for collecting the money was that he leveraged his connections to the Mormon Church, the LDS group. Mesa has the second largest LDS, at least at that time, per capita in the country. And a lot of the members of our team were members of the church. A lot of people would be brought through. So there was a lot of families investing basically life savings type investment, $50,000 little pops here and there. And they had raised an enormous amount of money in the many millions. But they had taken that money and they had invested it into other stuff, not the game. So when the market crashed, those other things collapsed in on themselves, and suddenly there was no money to finish the game, which is what they had collected the money based on. This again is what I'm being told by this dude who was hunting down each person. He said, actually, they had a team of people hunting down, trying to get the money back for these poor people that had invested. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I invested $50K right now into anything, that would hurt if that was just gone because of some shenanigans. And they were hunting, and it was a fascinating discovery. He was not a fan of the game industry, this guy that I met.
I think that, Steve and I are not the finance or the business people. And so that's kind of like a different realm from what we were used to. But there definitely seemed from our perspective to be some like unusual things that went on with like the founding and funding of the studio, in the sense that, like, normally speaking, if you're going after like a big MMO thing, you have like sizable investments coming from like large entities, either like, like a VC or like a publisher or like somebody who's like, really wealthy, like, because, building an MMO is kind of an expensive proposition. With Cheyenne, it was very different in that, like, there were a lot of small investments from like regular folk who had some money that they wanted to put in. And so, they would have these kind of unusual moments where we're all working in the office and like a little crowd of people would come by. It was kind of like, tourists coming to the zoo and looking at the animals in the zoo doing their thing, and be like, these are people making a game. And you'd look up from your keyboard and you'd be like, yes, I am making a game.
And then you're hearing
kind of wave, and they throw like some peanuts at us, and then they move on. And it's like that happened on a few occasions, and it was definitely a little unusual.
I had members of the team. If you get them on, you can ask. They'll probably tell this part of it, but they would have to be part of taking them around, and it was uncomfortable because there was a lot of projecting around how successful we were going to be, and that kind of stuff in those discussions as they were bringing people around. I also had a meeting one time with Gary where he was trying to think about ways to raise money, and you get, depending on the tier of money you got, you could get your name or your character into the game. And there was this whole discussion, and I was kind of like, I don't know, Gary, if Jaffa named Frank Wagner is really going to sell. So it's probably going to be just the humans, right? Like, we're not going to make it work with a Gould. Bob Fisk is the most evil Gould in the world, and so we just kind of we talked through that. And, that isn't an insane idea. People investing and having stuff in the game. I think on Chris's podcast that you had, like, at the beginning of the day, Frankie Muniz's character.
Wasn't Frankie going to be from Lucia, a racer? Frankie Muniz, for crying out loud, a member of the Lucian Alliance or something like that. He couldn't be from Earth. Right.
I believe that was the idea. That goes back into that space of one of the fascinating things about games is that the inputs are disparate and often coming from like very different sides, right? Like, there's you who's a purist, correctly, by the way, and it's not a criticism. You're a purist about Stargate. But then you have on the other side, like, hey, find a way to get Frankie Muniz in a racing sim. You're like, all right,
Now, to be fair, I would have been all aboard that. Because I was always like, you can't do it this way, but here's a way you might. Like, it was very like, present a solution. This is what you want to do. So
we would come to you for that kind of stuff. We would talk about those kinds of, if those issues came up, we would usually probably pitching you more ideas than brainstorming right away, but we would come together and have you give us that feedback, and it was very useful. So, but it's just the nature of a giant thing like that. Like, it always is changing, and depending on what you can or can't do, what state of the project is. we had at different moments realized, for example, that we had overscoped the size of the worlds, and we did a massive story revision around shrinking some of the worlds to make the game more shippable. Like all kinds of things like that. Like you have that as you're building a video game. Things change and they adjust. But we had, again, like we've said this before, but the team was pretty talented. Like the reactions to the adjustments were usually pretty great, and people generally stayed on board. There was conflict. It's a creative thing with lots of people. But for the most part, when we tried to solve a problem, usually the solution was pretty interesting.
Sean, when did you know that you probably weren't long for the project?
Well, for me, it was more of an individual thing. I mean, I want to say it was, I left before things got really bad. And, some of the stuff that Steve alluded to, I had kind of opted out by that point. And it was kind of a combination for me that Arizona was not necessarily the place that I wanted to be in like any long-term way. I came from the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's like where I'm from originally. And so I didn't have any like roots or connections there. And, there'd been an opportunity to help build a company with some folks that I knew from way back when, and kind of like be like a founder, which was really attractive to me, combined with the idea that, there were some things that were a little bit unusual about the situation at Cheyenne. And I can't say that I had any crystal ball as to like where it was going to go, but it was this kind of like, kind of an unsettled feeling in certain ways. Like I said, the kind of weird funding situation, because, I think, you have some instincts when you're a little younger. And then as time goes on, you kind of realize what those were grounded in. Because like subsequently, I've gone to work for companies that, like I worked on a game that had like really big funding. It was like a really big online game. And because it had like a founder that was like, kind of a rock star in the industry, they had like more than 100 million, and they would get like $20 million rounds and things like that. Right. So like, that's the kind of thing that you kind of expect or need when you're doing something so ambitious, or like really ambitious. And Cheyenne was not in that position. It's not like they were, like to get an extra runway to like make the game ship. It's not like they would go back to like, do a round 3 Series C investment from like venture folks and get like $20 million drop. It wasn't that kind of situation. It was like every dollar is being, kind of earned each step of the way. And that makes it really hard when things start to get tight. So anyway,
When you invest that money, you get into illicit stuff that isn't the game. That's also part of it. Like,
come on.
I remember I had never heard the term diversifying our portfolio before until I had come to Cheyenne. And I remember, meeting Shane at Deadlands, and then also working on a racing game, and just thinking to myself, wasn't this money for Stargate? Like, shouldn't you get your first product out the door before you start developing social networks at play, Snap Games, like where we're going to be the place? Why should you be the place? You haven't proven anything. But no one's asked me, so I'm not going to say.
But here's the thing, like, to be fair, even though I agree with you 100%, the overstepping was, I don't know, John Cleese in his long, weird steps kind of overstepping. Like, there was a lot of legs stepping over stuff. But this is not the only place I've ever been where the chunk of stuff that was for one thing that we would get started gets diversified out into other stuff. And it's like, how are we making 3 games here? We said we were making this, and now suddenly we're making these. And very often it's kind of like, well, that's because this is in its, sort of incubator mode, and that's what we have is incubator mode. Like,
even for a company that had never shipped a title before?
At studios who've never shipped a title before, at larger companies.
I think it's fair to say that, like, in the game business, if you are like a studio of some kind, it's a little scary to put all your eggs in one basket. And that's why studios have portfolios of different kinds of games. And especially because, there's always this assumption that like you get one game going, and then at some point it has like, kind of different requirements in terms of the amount of people that are on it. And so you like to have other projects so that people can ramp off of something, go on to something else, and these kinds of things. So I mean, there's a logic to some of these things, but there's also this like, I mean, you could call it a natural human tendency to like overreach and try to do these things a little too. I mean, it's sort of thing like, I mean, it's kind of cool on the surface to go like, hey, you know what? We're going to build a gaming hub in the city that has like really great living, and like we're gonna make it like so compelling that people are gonna want to come here, and it's gonna become like a hub. And then you think of the implications to like the local economy and everything. It's like, sure, that's a great ambition, but you're not doing that in like a year or two, and especially because it'd be one thing if the first game you were building was modest in scope. MMOs are not modest in scope. There's no such thing. And so when you start diversifying and going into like kind of alternate areas, when an MMO is the first thing you're trying to ship, it's like, that's a little scary.
At the time, my understanding was it was one of the most, if not the most expensive pieces of software to create. Because, I mean, look, Burning Crusade had only just been on the shelves for like just a few months. And I think Dan and I, we talked, we were in the neighborhood of like around 22 million, I think, if my memory serves. I don't even know if that includes marketing. So I can't fathom the architecture that would have to be in place exactly right to hold those load-bearing structures down to get that thing out the door.
It is. I mean, launching an MMO is a super challenging endeavor. I mean, like, I think everybody had gotten excited about WoW because, like, when I was working on Earth and Beyond, and then like, kind of like the world shifted in the MMO space when WoW came out, and it was suddenly, this kind of like quantum leap in terms of like what these games could do and who they could appeal to. And I think everybody got really excited and were like, MMOs are the license to print money. And
that showed. That showed over and over during the time when we kept playing the WoW killers that kept coming out. Conan game, Lotro.
I think that's one of the things that probably happened somewhat behind the scenes is that, you're saying like, WoW is the biggest thing ever. And we're going to be even bigger than the biggest thing ever. And then there's all these
anyone can just make that. So,
well, and all these other games are coming out and they're like, I mean, some of them are like crashing and burning. Some of them are doing like, okay, they survive for a few years and everything, but it's like nobody is dethroning WoW. And that's when I think you probably, if you're the guy with the, green visor in the business suite going like, this is a little bit scary. Maybe we need to have some other eggs,
I see.
Like that. I don't know. I mean, this is speculation on my part.
I'm not defending that decision, David. I'm not saying it's smart. I'm just saying that is an indicative of them being sort of singularly, wrong, as opposed to say collecting all your money from families and like that approach and making a gigantic game as opposed to making a smaller game. So for example, even the fundraising approach didn't necessarily match directly to the kind of product you make. You're going to make the biggest kind of game you can make at the time, or one of them, and you're doing it through mom and pop financing. That is a bold strategy. And to their, I guess, credit, but also no credit, they raised an enormous amount of money. And they did it, like it was impressive. Like they raised enough money so that when the market took a dump, we didn't have money, but had the market not taken a dump, we probably would have gone farther and maybe gotten to the point where we were probably 6 or 8 months out of beta, or at least like some initial really serious play test, depending on how we were doing that squint thing, right? If like your eyes could open a little bit, then we could have been in beta, and we were ways out. But it's a shame that when the market crashed, it really. I mean, a lot of people that live there, like people that lost their jobs on our game were like underwater on their houses, and there was a lot of very significant fiscal hurt for those of us who were sort of left behind. I did not own a house, and I cannot claim that for myself, but I know multiple people who were like, I'm going to lose money selling this house.
Yeah.
if I want to move now and that kind of stuff. It
Oh,
was rough.
I remember the president came out August. Well, no, it was after that. It was fall of '08, and Obama came to Mesa to talk about the economy because Mesa was one of the ground zero spots. It was from one of the worst. And I had been fired a few months earlier, and I'm sitting in my apartment trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And the president is coming to town to talk about how bad it is here. Great. Yeah, and it's hot as balls outside. What the hell am I doing here? I don't even like the heat. What am I here for? I remember hearing about an infamous meeting, all hands meeting, where someone had to get everyone together and basically saying that people weren't going to get paid or were going to get paid a fraction of that. And it was just like there was some shouting.
Well, people were upset. I mean, I was at that meeting. I'm sure I was. I think that the frustration, some of this is communication. Some of this is the way things were sold to us when people were brought in. Hey, we got money, don't sweat it. Come on out here. It's totally fine. Yeah. It's a startup, but it was fiscally. I also think that when you're pulled into a room and you're like, you're going to get a piece of a check for December, and then we didn't get paid in January, and then they came into some money. I've heard weird tales around that I don't want to publicly share because it's too weird, and I'm not convinced. And that it's like so good, I want to believe it, but I'm not sure. But anyway, we ended up with some money to get our back pay and get paid in like February, March of that year, and then it was over. We never got paid again, and I think by June it was dead. But in those initial meetings, what happened to the product at the time was that the veteran people who had pretty solid careers or had a longer resume, they were like this, and they'd probably been through this kind of stuff before, but it's not like games don't have layoffs or don't end. And they kind of jumped, right? So we lost a lot of really, really key people who just were able to find jobs. So a lot of us greenies kind of kept, we kind of filled the gaps while it was gone. I mean, for me, I ended up kind of in Sean's job because there wasn't anybody. And it wasn't a bad thing for me in the end. It was a little bit of a promotional, like probably an overstep of a few, whatever long until I could have had it. But there was a lot of that. So a lot of people kind of ended up sort of stepping into bigger roles. But we weren't making any money, we weren't being paid. And eventually, people were just kind of falling off. It was rough.
Were you there for Resistance?
What is Resistance? I don't remember.
Stargate Resistance came after.
Oh, no.
That was the shooter game that, kind of used a lot of those kind of stuff.
I heard about that, but I by that point had actually joined Dan Elgren in Denver. And that is one thing, like that, we're talking about the talent, the people with talent and people like being really good. The other thing was that there was a lot of relationships that people had there that helped them land or pulled people along or started or kept careers going because there were good people there. I mean, I tell this story all the time about one of the interns we got from Carnegie Mellon. This guy came in, Joe Grubb came in, he was an intern. And this is one of my favorite, like, you want to make your boss love you, do what Joe Grubb did, stories. So Joe was part of our content team. He was implementing Material. And he discovered, I don't know how he did this because how could we have ever made a mistake, but he discovered a problem in one of our story points. And he was like, this is not going to work the way you want it to work. And he sent me, Sean, Dave DeBoard, and I want to say Brian Hines an email. And in the email, he was like, hey, I've discovered this problem. He outlined the problem. Now, a lot of new people would stop there. This is broken and it's dumb or whatever. He didn't do that. He provided 3 different possible solutions, all of which could have worked, maybe. And he set up a meeting for us, for all of us to meet a couple days later, which he'd already scheduled and put on the calendars. Now, like, what a way for you to be like, this dude is serious. Like, first off, all the things that he shared as his ideas fit what we were doing. Remember, we talked about the guardrails and being in the game or not. Joe understood what we were making. And he showed that a week into his job with this thing that he did. It was so smart. And that managing upward is kind of a thing that when you're the boss, because there's fires everywhere, you don't want them coming from below. And he nailed it. I use that example every time I do a talk on when you get into the business and how to work with your leads, because it was great. You don't remember that, do you, Sean?
No, I don't. But I mean, it goes back a little bit to it was a talent dense team, and especially like some people who did not have like a long track record of experience or anything. And for some folks who like their first job and whatever, but like really good people that you could see then and then subsequently have gone on to like do other things. I mean, we had a lot of Carnegie Mellon, their computer program graduates that came and proved themselves. I remember there was a young producer who was very wet behind the ears that would like literally come from like the airplane landing in Phoenix, and was like full of enthusiasm and was like, this person is going to tear it up, and subsequently become like a very senior producer and does really well. There were a lot of folks that I mean, I think that if it wasn't for the people who were really dedicated and talented, things would have gone off the rail probably like much sooner or more spectacularly. I mean, it's like in a lot of ways, I mean, I say this affectionately, but the project was like that old Cary Grant movie, North by Northwest, where he's like drunk in a car trying to escape these bad guys. And he's like totally soused and he's like swerving all over the road, but somehow not going off the cliff. And it's like a miracle. He should go off the cliff at any moment, but somehow manages to survive and, get to the police and whatever. And it's like, that was kind of Cheyenne, that like, it was just that last cliff that like, oh, we didn't make that turn, and like, but like the, given the ambitions on like so many levels and the constraints, it's kind of spectacular that it got as far as it did.
We had Chris said a thing in his podcast that I do want to set the record straight on. So
this is what we do. Go right ahead.
No, I'm not accusing him of being wrong. He just told a different version of my story. So the one thing, like, this is an example, I think, of the sort of like the talent dense sort of opportunity that we had. So we, as the content team, would do concepts for different planets. We'd do these, and they were like thick. There was a lot of writing here, man. I can't really tell you how much material we generated, but the number of documents is, I think I sent Sean some stuff, and what was it, 3 gigs, and I only did, that was just what I took at the end, and that was the only stuff I just kind of had room to grab on a flash drive. But there was a lot of material, and we would make these really detailed documents about these worlds, and we would be giving them to Howard and the concept artists on that side, and we'd be, like, hey, we want this, and they were super detailed. And one day Howard grabs me and he goes, hey, listen, you're giving us a lot of stuff and it's really good, but maybe try giving us less stuff. Give us more, just the general, like, give us what you need to make the game work, but don't give us so much, like it looks like this and has that. Just let's see what happens. And he and I was like, sure, Howard, you're so powerful, I have to do what you say. I was not thrilled about that, but I agree. Howard is one of the most wonderful people on earth, by the way. So I agreed. I will try it. So we do that, and we give Eric Belisle, the concept artist, some stuff for one of the planets that we had in mind. And what Eric came back with was so weird and genius and smart and visually fascinating that we took that and modified our own stories to match more of what Eric had made based on what we had required. And we went from design on high, sort of forcing art into a space, into the art and the game design integrating like insanely perfectly, because they were inspiring us, so that the stuff you saw was actually mapped in the stories rather than the stuff you saw sort of reflecting the stories. And I never forgot that. I've taken that everywhere I've ever gone. And but that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't, that concept team was really talented. Eric, specifically, because I worked with him pretty closely, that dude was so good. And we just ended up like, we changed the way we worked, we changed the way that we related, and the way that we even constructed stuff was based on that kind of thing. And there was a lot of that was going on there. The animation team was really good. We had a lot of talent across the board. the systems team, there was just a lot of really great stuff that would go on. The world building team. Like,
I
really
will
beautiful.
say, in terms of my own experience, the collaboration that I had with like the art team, or that I saw between design and art, was one of the best, and like it's kind of a cherished memory for me because, you know, I mean, I still remember, you know, how Howard Lyon, who was the art director at the time, you know, really great guy and like had a really good team. And we would do these like daily walkarounds where like there's a little group of us. I remember like myself, Chris Klug, Howard, I forget however other people, but we'd go to the different artists and be like, hey, let's talk about what you're working on. And the thing is, I've been in organizations where that was a really uncomfortable experience and people are like very kind of closed and defensive. This was not that. This was like, I still again like remember that and kind of use it as my exemplar of like, this is best practices of how you do like kind of a walk around with like an art team that's doing like concept stuff, like, you know, and rapidly iterating, and, you know, you're giving them thoughts and notes and you're having interesting discussions and they're collaborating, and, you know, we're all like kind of coming up with some cool stuff. And it was like, that was really fun. And, you know, I mean, it, you know, on the list of my regrets about the project, I mean, I'm always sad that the story that, you know, we kind of like built, which was pretty grand and epic, never got to be told and or played. Like I wanted to play like an OpCore guy busting out of prison in the castle and like that frozen prison and making his way. That just seemed like the coolest idea as like a way to start your character and like really set the tone. But you know, the planets and the places that you were going to go, they were going to be pretty interesting. You know, there was, you know, things like Agnos and was it Anima Vitra, like
Anima Vitris, yeah, a cat,
um,
a cat, and
and
weren't we looking at Mel Harris potentially being the Agnos AI? I forget what its name was, but there
remember.
was
I
a couple
mean,
of things that we were poking around for that was like, ooh, that's gonna be really interesting.
I
So,
can't remember. I mean, the one that I remember that was like my dream was the OpCore faction that is the like kind of rogue Black Ops SGC that does whatever it takes to get the job done.
it's like the Rogan ID, yeah.
You know, that we're protecting humanity at whatever cost to like anybody else. You know, had this Colonel Marsh running the operation, and I like, you know, I wanted us to cast Kurt Russell in that role so badly. Like that was one of those, you know, and it was like, it was something that was kind of half discussed because Steve has lots of connections with Kurt. Steve and Kurt are like this. And, you know, that would have been like a dream kind of like voice casting to like pull that one off in my mind.
Good. Instead, the VO was just going to be me, Sean, doing Al Pacino as an Asgard.
Well, if you've ever heard Steve's Al Pacino, it is good. And the Al Pacino Asgard, that would have been
because we have him for Thor, like for a joke. We for a while like doing just I was reading all his text as Al Pacino. It looks like the strangest are a problem, and it was going to be great.
People are always asking me.
The VO stuff was always one of those things that, like, again, like we're talking about scope. Some of the sort of experience stuff in retrospect, having been in the business now for a long time, some of those things, you know, you look at it and you think, oh, VO, yeah, of course we do VO. VO on that project was massive. Weeks in the studio getting the actors to get it right. And we wrote all that stuff. I mean, that MMO, I pretty much wrote the majority of any spoken or said thing in the entire MMO, right? And that was in before we had finished it. And I remember just thinking, like, the number of sides, the way we'd have to predict, you know, get the sides ready. It was very, very, very grand and ambitious and exhausting.
Well, one of these days I hope to be able to read some of it. So I have someone who wants to pop on and say hello really quick before we wrap.
Oh,
Katie. Oh my God.
Katie.
No. Hi.
How you doing?
I'm so sorry.
You know what? You can see it on the internet.
I know. That's the good news.
But
oh my goodness!
Cut out all the parts where we talked about you behind your back.
Okay, so, that's good. That's good.
If
no,
you're
I
lucky.
got this message. Like I just picked up my phone. It's like gang's all here, and I'm like, huh? What's he? Uh-oh. Sorry. I don't even know what day it is. I'm so sorry.
None of us
We've
have
had a-
ever done it, you know.
None of us what?
I think I did it. I think I did that one time in a meeting for funding for a company one time. I was like,
Oh, great.
Well,
10 minutes.
we've had a thoughtful conversation. You were missed, but we
Oh,
it's
no.
it's gonna be
I
it's gonna be a
told
good
you
one.
you
So.
didn't pay me enough to see Steve again, but
I learned how to make a Zoom meeting invite for you, and you still didn't show up. So,
you didn't. You did for Howard's, but not this one.
oh, my bad.
Yeah, it wasn't
I'm
on my
sorry.
calendar. No, it's okay. I should have remembered anyway. I literally thought it was
You're
Wednesday
absolutely
until
right.
about
That
10
is
minutes
me.
ago.
Thank you. See, I still don't know how to do
Sean.
it.
Hi, Steve.
Good to see you.
Tell me everything. Tell me
Well-
that. Just start from the beginning. Tell me all the
Well,
things.
We'll get the AI transcript to like just tell you exactly what.
Right.
I was actually
Oh,
we got to the part where I was hoping to like, Steve was mentioning that, he had this big drop of, Stargate materials, and I'd been going through it because he shared it with me, and I found like a concept piece for the Asgard that like I had completely forgotten about. That like it was actually kind of cool. I don't know if you can let me share it or not on the screen, David, or if you're willing to.
Is this going to be a joke?
No, that might be a whole setting.
Nothing Sean ever says is serious. What is this
Yeah,
going to be?
you're
I'm
calling it.
scared.
Pretty wonderfully.
I
I remember people asking me back around 08, you really need to be watching The Office. And I'm like, why do I want to go home and watch something that I live because of these guys?
No, I know.
I mean, in fairness, we
Never
really
seen it.
did enjoy.
Have you never seen it?
I love these guys to this day. It was a
No.
really good
Have you
time.
seen The Office though?
Nope. Because of Sean and Steve.
Don't you miss? Don't you miss?
And among others, it was like
because you miss them.
I know, but it was seriously like this is not that I did. I mean, I loved working with them, obviously, but I wasn't going to go home and watch more of that kind of thing. So,
Oh, you should see it. It's pretty good.
So, Dave, let me just set this up. What I'm going to share that, we that collaboration, that like artistic, like design, and everything. We were really trying to get to the essence of what was going to work, and so we did some exploration on the Asgard, and we felt like this was going to be like we wanted players to be able to express themselves and like kind of some customization and everything, and have characters that really could speak. And I mean, in MMOs, it's like dancing is a whole thing. So
the hammer pants.
The Asgard got to dance, and so this was the concept piece that was put together.
Are you triggered, David? Are you okay?
I am going to keep my mouth shut. But in one vein, it's extraordinary.
That's
so
funny.
Absolutely wild.
That's
There's
great.
part of me is
I don't
like,
even know if that's
they
real.
did. They
you
did
make
that
or is
just for
that
you,
real?
David. Probably.
David, it's like if Stargate had continued to this day, like WoW has, there would have been so many pranks, and like the technology now, it elevates the craft of pranking.
Pranking.
Sakes.
Is
Yeah,
that's
Yeah.
not
you
like
guys.
like honestly, I'm gonna say this is dumb, but I know we had to do the dancing stuff. That isn't an actual thing, is it? You just did that shot, or is that one of the things? Because I've not looked through the stuff that I
Was
sent
that
you.
because
years.
of the whole Asgard don't dance and
That was-
dancing the
I-
Asgard
this
will
was-
dance?
That was
This is my, giving David his props, right? That like
Yeah.
the
Aw.
Asgard dance. Like,
Yeah, that was
no,
probably that grew out of that.
I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
no, it was
That's
awesome.
funny. That's
Oh,
funny.
it's way too serious. It was way too serious. Get the hell over yourself. Jeez, whatever.
Everybody was. Everybody was. I mean, you were the keeper of the lore, so But
Yeah,
I was
yeah, you have to be
a
serious
keeper.
about it.
Yeah.
I
You have
mean,
to.
now that would get clicks. They'd be like, even people that are purists would be like, "What is this?" And then they'd be like, "Oh,
Let's
there's an
check that
MMO. Cool." Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's been some of the confusion. Is like, I want to go play it, and it's like, watch the video and get the context. So, and so many
Oh,
people are like, well,
really?
just go ahead and release it. Like, it's not
Oh.
that it's built on an
Oh my-
architecture
yeah,
that no longer exists. You
Let's
can't
just do that.
press play. That Katie and I fielded a couple of those, but yeah, it's great walking down memory lane with you guys.
You couldn't even if you wanted to, you'd want to update that technology anyway, even if you could like reboot it, right? Like that
Yep.
game is
Yeah, even if you could, yeah.
really old.
I love I love the at-home devs who are like, well, just do this. It's like, yeah, I'll just get right on that, bucko.
Right.
That's it.
Oh,
So
it
easy.
takes 10 minutes and a
Um,
couple of people on torque. Right? Like,
Yeah. Maybe some AI thrown in there to fill in some missing pieces. Yeah, it's like using
Oh, they'd
frog
love
DNA
that.
to build a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's not happening. So, God, guys, thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry I missed this, but we'll do another one, and
We will.
we'll keep circling back over and over until we get sick of each other, I think.
We're going to do something bigger later on in the year. We'll start bringing teams together to break things up a little bit and make it more
Yeah, I
interesting.
think
But
we'll do 2 or 3 at a time, and then we'll do like a big one for each team. Will be fun,
I'm-
just so everybody can see each other again.
I'm convinced that if you got like, I don't know, a dozen key people all in the same room to reminisce, the stories that would get triggered, because everybody's forgotten because this is so many years ago, right? But like if you started the conversation, it would be like one person would have one little piece of it and another person would have another.
That's right.
And then it would unlock this, and there's probably like a treasure trove of
Yeah.
not safe for prime time
You can
stories.
see how professional I am. The only thing I remember from working there are the stories. I don't remember what we call
But the relationships
Same.
are the heaviest things that we carry, so that makes a lot of sense. So I just
But
need to get my
David,
hands
you
on your
remember-
documents at some point, so I
David,
can
you
at least
remember-
know.
You remember more about the game than I'll ever know about it, like ever.
The IP
Like,
is
you
why I
just-
was there. So that's
I know.
it's historical documents to this day of something that could have been. So it's
Mhm.
all relevant.
Yeah.
Guys, I've got another
Thank
meeting
you.
in 10 minutes. So thank
Okay.
you so much. That was Sean Dugan and Steve Garvin from
It sure was.
Cheyenne Mountain Entertainment. And now you can appreciate why I've never watched The Office. So, but truly,
I
I mean,
know.
those guys were so much of the heart and soul of that project. I found, I don't know how much longer after I had done a bit about the vending machine at
Right. Oh
Stargate
my
Worlds when Alana Sabin went and made Stargate labels for all of the
I remember.
all of
the
the
soda.
the
Yep.
drinks, all the soft
Yep.
drinks, and
Yep.
so I filmed a little documentary on it, and I put a camera near the vending machine for a couple of hours to get people using it. So I was going to do a montage of people using the machine.
Right.
And a while later, I pulled out the DV tape and I was looking through some of this stuff. And Steve and it may have been Sean, did this whole like 5-minute bit talking shit about me that I completely missed at the time. And I was talking with Steve a month or two ago to get his to wet his whistle for this, and he was like,
Yes.
I don't remember any of that.
It was it's a day in the life of Steve Garvin for
That's
something
it.
like that to happen. Of course he didn't remember because it was just a
This is
day
what he
in the
does.
life.
That's
Always.
it. Well, I am thrilled that we're continuing to do these, and we got a few more to crank away at. So I'll see you on
quite
the
a
next
few.
one.
We've got a few more yeses, so I'll put them on the list, and yeah, we'll keep cracking.